I want to get you to think about you and your church, and whether you can see this or not, a lot of this relates to me back to why a lot of ministers and people in Christian ministry go into a season of depression and frustration and discouragement and darkness. These are actually related in my mind. And so, understanding your church, so in RUF, like one of our presuppositions, we call demographics. So most of you have been around churches and read literature and thought about church planning and movements in such a way. You're at least familiar with demographics. And I want to start off by saying this is not exactly a discussion about demographics. So demographics are, demographics are who is around your church. So is your church in a community of upper income folks? Is your church in middle income folks? Is your church in lower income folks? Is your church in an ethnic diverse neighborhood? Demographics go a bigger step, kind of further than that. Like when people go to church, the same direction they go to work, believe it or not. People's primary social networks today are related to their children and not to their churches and other social structures. A lot of social structures have lost power, and what drives people are their children. So all my friends come from my children, from sitting in high school basketball games, high school football games, middle school dance, and that wasn't true 50 years ago. So all of that is demographic. Hipsters are demographic. They want to go in a neighborhood, they want to be best friends with their neighbors, they want to drink milk from cows that no one ever touched and no one ever had a fence around and that no one ever fertilized the grass, and it's farm to table, and if it's not farm to table and you hate the earth. They want to raise chickens, which in my neighborhood now gets you a ticket. I love my suburban world where we have empowered people to buy eggs at a grocery store. We just finished in this country raising the 6 healthiest generations in the history of the world. It's not even close. It's unchallengeable. We cracked the code, but it ain't good enough for y'all. It's not good enough for y'all. Well, processed sugar, why don't you just go out whoring? That chicken had a cage around it. You shoot children. Why not? So, demographics are an important question, but I'm asking you a different question now, and that is, you have got to figure your church out, and that takes sort of brutal honesty to admit what your church is. So I'll do this a little bit around my church in a second, and it won't be that painful. Chris, my assistant pastor, is here, and I might ask him. He'll agree on this with me a little bit. But I want to say something about you first that relates to your church, that you have to own. And my phrase about ministers is that no one gets to stay home in the Bible. A minister is someone who goes on a trip with Jesus. So if you think about it, Abraham crossed about 15 language groups to go from his home. He was homeschooled, literally lived in a compound, lived with his dad. His dad taught him everything he ever knew. I'm being honest. Yeah. And he said, nope, I want you to go live in this foreign country with people who are pagans and move over there. People attacked him, and it's a pretty tough thing. Israel had to wander around for 40 years to get strong, and then they got taken into exile, and Jesus had no place to lay his head, and then once the church got founded and we were ready to do family ministry in Acts, Jesus hated it, so he sent a persecution to scatter the church. Jesus doesn't like people staying in one place, which is against all the stuff being said in the PCA. But what you need to own about your church, and this is really going to challenge you, it's going to bother some of you, is that there are several things that are true about you that you have to own. The church you're called to is a great church. They're different churches. I know we have First Pres Chattanooga, and I've seen all the different places y'all come. But you, related to your church, are these things. You are an outsider, you're an employee, you're temporary, and you're not an owner. This is the most important thing I can convey to you about this. You are an outsider to your church. You're an employee of that church. You're seen by primarily the church as temporary. You're not an owner in that church. Yes, Brad.
Do you think I get this? I think some of the people in the church and certainly they accept that about me as an associate pastor more than they do the senior pastor.
Yeah.
But some people, I feel like some people in the church get that, but some people don't.
No, I don't think. I'm worried about the ones who don't.
Okay.
So I'm telling you this so that you'll acknowledge that no matter how good your sessional committee is that oversees you or your committee you work with, when the rubber hits the road, i.e., there's a challenge, these characteristics become true of you. Now, I'm not being the pessimist. I'm trying to help you think about how to lead your church well. Right? And, Brad, what I'm saying is, my example recently is a good friend of mine in the West got in a tight situation. They had 4 elders, and this church had been there forever. He's the recent pastor. He's come into this church by everybody's definition. All 4 elders, every deacon, church has doubled in size. It took him about 5 years. This wasn't some tremendous blow, but he just slowly, faithfully helped that church grow. Done, I think if we did measurables, me and he would get an A+. And one of these elders turned on him for some particular reasons, and the reasons are worth noting, but he had this breakfast with these 3 elders, and they're like, man, we got your back. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. This was not an attempt like to foist the other elder out, but it's like, hey, he's going to say this, we got it. And when the meeting came, it was silent. The one elder didn't make the exact charges they thought. He just sort of implied them and grumbled a little bit. And my friend he went and he said to the 3 elders, I kind of feel betrayed, right? Like he was sort of making this accusation, and they all said the same thing basically, like, we don't know if he'll be here forever. We have to live with him until we die. And what my friend had to process, because he wasn't going anywhere when we quit him, was that the church was working, right? He was having fun. Is that at the end of the day, there was something unique about those 4 men that had been there before he came, and in one sense, they might be there after he left, right? And so he wasn't one of the gang. He was, I'm just using this to say, if you don't understand this about your church, you're going to be confused about how to lead them.
And I was just asking, but not every member of the church gets that dynamic.
No,
play.
they don't. They think you're one of the gang. Right. And some of them, the one of the gang people are the dangerous ones, actually, Brad, because they're not acknowledging that other people think this way. And primarily people in power. And I actually don't think this is evil. Like, you don't need to fix this. Right? It's I'm a father of a woman, and I have 3 daughters, and there are days when it's just emotionally more charged in my house, and fixing it is a dumb thing to do. It's just it's just not a wise thing. It's just different reasons, and I'm not this. So for somebody like, I want to be a member of the session, and I want to be one of the team. Yeah, but you're only one really great offer away from leaving them. You got a number. Don't lie to yourself. Don't, seriously. Like, the 4 of you who are committed to living in your church forever are either volunteers who are really part of the power structure, and that's a beautiful thing and nothing wrong with that at all, or your spouse is making $400,000 a year, and this is just kind of a fun side job. Which is an even better plan in my mind. But for the rest of us, when something goes wrong, a group of parents say, we're not being faithful to the ministry. Children complain about our teaching. You have to recognize that these dynamics are in place. That these people who have been, and are, let me say this, these people who are your partners, your pastors, and people who love you in that moment become your boss. It's a family-run business and you're not part of the family. And they're not sure you have to be there forever, even though you bought a house 6 months ago. This dynamic is just crucial for you to lead. It can sound like you're saying, well, John, I can't lead. No, when you acknowledge this, you can begin to own this and lead well. And really sort of force it forward. Now, I'm getting some strange looks, so I need to stop and do some more questions.
Can you make it? Oh, go ahead.
How does that impact the way you lead?
I'll do it in a second. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
It's the same idea.
I want to ask, Robert, do you agree with me? I don't care if you Robert's worked in 2 church settings. One he was more intimate with and grew up in, one he's been more hired into.
Yeah, the first one was less that.
Yeah, the first one you were an insider who got hired in, yeah.
Right. But yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I have experienced that and learned it from both sides in the church I was in beforehand, thinking we all agreed we were going to sail into the sunset together, making formal plans with session members, and all it took was a couple of years of slow budgets and a special committee to restaff the entire church, and all of a sudden there's no TE position left for youth ministry. So that was a hard pill to swallow, but with good counsel and people caring for it, we began to realize that this lesson is actually most helpful for people before they get into ministry. The better you can understand and at least adjust your expectations, because there's 2 things of every family going into ministry. There's you wanting to know and love that congregation and grow with them and see their kids and blah, blah, blah. And then there's your own family wanting to dig in, build roots, and be a part of a community yourself. And we make lots of comparisons to when the banker has an affair, he gets a divorce and stays in the bank. But when the pastor has to leave, everything changes.
Gotta leave school, gotta leave the house.
School, house, community, everything changes, and it's starting over. And so this is a huge lesson. It sounds dark, but it's like when you can start to see some of the freedom in it, and you and your spouse and family are on the same music, it can be less of a burden. But yeah, I had to learn that the hard way.
John, don't you think that individual context also is important? It's going to be to one degree or another greater in one church than another. I'm in a 175-year-old church, so that's like a generation of definite employee. But in a church plant where you're
sure, but what's interesting about the church plant is, true. And this is sort of like I'm piggybacking what you say, but even in the church plant, you're asking people. So when I took a job coming out of seminary, I knew I had 3 moves in me. And I might have skipped 1 move by doing the RYM gig, right? But I have 3 moves in me. You go to seminary, you make this a profession, you got 3 moves in you. Everybody who's in our church, although our church is a little different because of Oak Ridge and University, but primarily, Cedar Springs session is a bunch of people who have lived there 2 generations. When Jim Barnes planted his church, everybody's from Farragut. So even though Jim planted it, he was the first in, he's the outsider still. I don't mean that they don't respect him. I just mean when push came to shove with a pastor who got a raise, who they're begging to stay, but when push came to shove, they went, I got to have peace at Little League Baseball. Like, they didn't really hang him out to dry. This did not end his ministry. It was a shocking moment. My most shocking moment in this job literally almost killed me. Because I worked for the Tennessee RYF committee for years. And when you go into a Tennessee RYF committee meeting, they act like you're Jesus. So Robert's been on this committee. And they say things like, we don't know how you did it. We're so proud of you. It's amazing what you do. And they just compliment you and just say all these. It's really a great thing. And they give you raises, and then they give you raises beyond what they're making in their own presbytery. It's a wonderful thing. So I had worked for them for 7 years, and I thought, man, this is awesome. I'm awesome. They're awesome. And it's awesome. This is just awesome. This is great. So I go as the assistant coordinator to the first ever meeting. When I'm not a campus minister, and the campus minister came and reports, and it was just, you're just awesome, great. And these guys made these requests. Oh, sure. And they say, well, we're going to go into executive session and decide about this. And these guys walk out the door, and they close the door, and like there was a demon infestation. I'm serious. Like, these guys are like those ungrateful, spoiled kids. I can't believe they would come in here asking for this. Don't they know how much we make? And I literally, like, it was like a movie. Like, I was in a movie. Ringing in my ears started. And they weren't being venomous. They were just finally being honest. And at one point, dumb, brave, say anything John Stone goes, well, how long have you felt this way? And the first answer to me is, you're the guy who started asking for too much money in this state. Can't breathe. And then the guy, to his credit, said, because John, he goes, maybe you did, but, you got to remember, I make $44,000, and they were paying me $63,000. So this man had given me $20,000 more than he was making. He was a pastor. He had more responsibility than me. But what was interesting is in that moment, what I learned is they never really ever are going to tell you all that they think. That doesn't mean they're not on your team. And they really did rejoice in it took me several meetings to go, okay, they're not the devil incarnate, and they haven't been hiding. But that moment for me was so helpful. It's helped me at my own church. Because a couple of times I've ended up in the room with our session, kind of as opposed to our staff. And you just recognize that as much as they want to say they're on the same page, they're just not. And if you don't acknowledge that, you're going to say and do some things that don't serve you well later. And you're going to assume some things that can get you in trouble. Now, the implications for how you do this well, y'all are believing me, is you do have to work hard to build one-on-one relationships with some people in your leadership. So it's kind of hard to admit this, but once you get a session, probably with more than 4 or 5, you're going to know some of those session members better than others. But especially if you're an associate pastor or an assistant pastor, you're probably only going to know 1 or 2 of them well, and you need that investment. Even if on the crucial moment they can't stand with you or sway it, you've got to create friends with some of the leaders in your church. You've got to begin to talk to them. One of the ways they'll help you is they'll help you understand what you sound like. Like when I said this to the session and they all nodded, what did they hear? Because again, I've seen sessions nod, and what they mean is I understand what you're saying, but we're not going to do it right now. And they don't say that in the room. And you need for your friend to come out of the room and go, you're not ready for that. What are they ready for? Well, they really like that you have 70 kids in youth group. Okay, it's not. I didn't learn where I stood right there. They love me, but they're not really ready for me to drive yet. Okay, I just need to know that. Because what that committee kind of was doing in Tennessee was going, what do you want? And we'd ask, and then they'd say yes, and we'd ask some more. And what we were doing is just punching them in the stomach. And didn't know we were punching them in the stomach. But part of your job is to create a relationship with a deacon or a elder. Somebody, I think you were telling me, he has a deacon he walks with, an elder.
Yeah.
Well, every 2 weeks, you said?
Yeah, every 2 weeks we get together and walk, play frisbee golf, or just walk. He comes to church and walk around the neighborhood. Talk.
In our context, part of what I'm telling you is understanding your church is understand that elder structures and deacon structures are strange beasts. They are places, they're good things, but they are where decisions are made. They move very slowly. They're not radical people, especially if you're an older church or, part of their answer to you is, dude, you're 40, you've been here 10 years. We've been here 280 years. You've been here 1/190th of our time. You're the 15th person that told us we didn't like everybody in our county. We know that. Go to work. Go like the people we don't like. That's their answer. They got to coach Little League. Their wife is mad that their house is smaller than the other elder's wife. Vacation was terrible. They didn't sleep. They hate the beach. Their family wants to go to the beach. You got to remember, these people are you, right? They've just got a lot going on, and your sort of I'm going to change the world can be difficult for them. You've got to do this slowly and relationally. Even in church plants, the minute you're particularized, change is over. You are what you are within 5% of that from that day forward. It's very difficult to flip a church. Somebody asked me recently about Redeemer. What do I think about Redeemer? Well, I think my church is in the wrong place. Can't be changed. Like all these people are like, we can change this. I'm like, no, you can't change this. It's in the right place. It's got great people. We have a ton of people. Our pastor has stepped down and he's taken another job. We've had more people coming. Not because he stepped down. The church just has momentum. I'm just saying it has momentum.
More people in the last 7 months.
Yeah, it's crazy. But it's in the wrong place. I mean, they're going to come in. They're going to join. They're going to love it. They're going to take weekly communion. They're going to feel blessed. And then they're going to look up and go, where's the youth program? And we're going to say down here in the most dangerous neighborhood in Knoxville, and they're going to go to Cedar Springs. And they're going to come back after the kids go to school. It's literally what happens. Can't change that. I think that part of why I'm saying, so this is the first thing. Let me do this. You have to understand the leadership of your church. And you're in it, but you're not it. You're in it, but you're not it. And it takes a lot of relational capital to fix this. The most important thing my pastor friends can do is hang out with their session and try to get them in context where they are watching football, drinking alcohol, and on vacation. You don't get to know your session through business meetings. I'm not advocating that drinking is some great thing. I'm advocating being normal with your session. The more you become their friend, the more you share their pain, the more they're going to trust you and love you. But these things are true. So you have to understand the leadership of your church. I think the second thing I want you to hear about this, I'm doing okay on time, is you have to understand what your church is. So I am amazed by how many people don't know what their church is. So now I can use my church. So my church was supposed to be, because I planted it, at the behest of Presbyterian. What I mean by that is I started the Bible study because everybody wanted another PCA church in Knoxville. And we wanted a church in a part of town called Bearden. So if you're from Knoxville, you know what that is. We basically were acknowledging that in our town, Knoxville is defined by Interstate 40, which runs, this is west to east. This is downtown Knoxville where the university is. And right here is a river, and that river runs from right up by the university downtown down through here. And the richest neighborhood in Knoxville is right here. It's called Sequoia. And it's crazy square footage. And then this road and this river define everybody that I know in Knoxville. Knoxville's a much bigger town than this. But in the world that PCA people move in, they live in this pile of the puzzle. So there was big old Cedar Springs out here, which was leaving the PCA and hated us. There was Jim Barnes way out here off the map in Farragut with a bunch of people. And then there was a dying church, West Hills and nothing. And we wanted to put a church in here. And the Presbytery told us we had to put a church down here. So this is where Redeemer Presbyterian Church is, which was supposed to be Grace and Peace, because my dumb self didn't lie about the vote. Grace and Peace is a better name than Redeemer. And Redeemer won by one vote. And I wanted it to be Grace and Peace. Paul Hunt wasn't involved, and I should have lied and said, Grace and Peace won. Welcome to Grace and Peace. One of the biggest mistakes of my life. And then, here's what's interesting about this place in Knoxville. Nobody lives there. The closest physical liver to that location is Chris Talley. He lives, I think, 1 mile from the church, a little less than 1 mile. 3/4 drive, and about, as the crow flies, maybe shorter than that. But after that, it's probably, I'm not going to count, we have 4 or 5 people. Yeah. But we have 2 areas. Starting at Westtown Mall and then Turkey Creek Mall, we call this suburban heaven. This is where you ought to plant churches. You know why? People live out here. You know where you ought to plant your church? Where people are. Let me tell you what's down here. Nobody. In the actual city limits of Knoxville are 2,100 people. I mean, that's
What?
What?
in the actual city limits of Knoxville. 2,100 people live in those city limits. That's down the original city. I mean, now they've gone to a county government, and, you know.
Yeah.
But in the cities too. So we decided we're gonna be urban. There are 9 urban people in Knoxville. And that's on a good day. No, they do. They have to come out here to make money. They all opened up a business down here that's all cool, and then they sell something out here to make money. Now there is developing a corridor going up here, and this is interesting, where the hipsters are. And this is where, and they're about to put 2 restaurants in there. It's going to work, and it's called Old North Knoxville. And the trouble with Old North Knoxville is, this is where we're going to get real, is your school choices are terrible. It's not, I'm not saying anything about public schools. I'm a public school user, but you can't go to that public school. So you can't move in there, because really the only thing that matters to you is repeating your life in your children's life, which means schooling them, right? So we're either homeschooling, private schooling, but the trouble with this town is, best high school in Knoxville, great high school in Knoxville, okay high school in Knoxville, they're free. Or you can move down here and fight traffic and come out to Christian Academy of Knoxville, which is on the wrong side of the tracks, but a great school, and you can learn to be Christian competitive. That's what you can learn there, right? So everything in our world says you have to live out here because you want something called friends. You want opportunities. You want things for your children. So we all live out here. I mean, just all over. If you do the red dot test, it comes up as something like 60% of our congregation out here, about 20% up here, and then the others are just scattered. They're drive-iners, right?
South and
Yeah.
city.
And maybe one day, like, this river is huge in Knoxville. Like, there's a bunch of people over here. You don't know them. Nobody crosses the river to go to church on the whole. That's fair, Chris. Nobody crosses Middlebrook. Right, you get into Carnes. Like, these barriers are a big deal, and our church is in the wrong place. And our church won't admit that it is in the wrong place. And it's not its fault. Like, nobody did this. Presbytery told us we had to go down there because West Hills got nervous. I don't blame West Hills for getting nervous. They're a great church, but they were afraid we were going to show up and carpet bomb.
And the university's down
Yeah, the university's down there, but you can't get university students when you do 2-hour worship services that start at 9 in the morning because kids aren't coming to a 9 o'clock service. Hey, I love my church. Crystal, I love my church. I love my church, but it is not what it says it is. And therefore, everybody's frustrated. And staff are frustrated. Pastors frustrated. Sessions frustrated. For you to do effective ministry in your context, you have to name what your church is. And here's what it probably is. It's unfortunately a good suburban church. With kids who go to school and who play football, who are busy, who are really good kids. That's what they are. Like, I know that you want to reach inner city kids. I want to see those that are impoverished, then those that are poor and they're very different than me reached. The trouble is, none of us live among them. None of us. We don't. It doesn't mean we can't help. It doesn't mean there's strategies. But we've said that we are this thing that we are not. And it's kind of colored everything we've done poorly. And so I can't help you see your church. But you have to see it for what it is. And then you have to go do ministry like Cedar Springs, bless their hearts. Man, they're awesome. Just built the youth house from heaven. Rock, big screen TVs, 5 meeting rooms, cost $1.7 million. And wonder what happened when they did that. Their youth ministry tripled. More people started coming to their church because they're out here where suburban people live. They didn't go, let's put $1.7 million downtown and send a bunch of awkward hipsters downtown to reach people who we don't know, love, want to reach. See, our church can be something. Our church can be something important. Our church can be used. It can't be used until it admits what it is. And it's an awkward thing. Because the main thing that's going on at this point, because Paul has stepped down because he took another job, is that these people are now battling these people for its identity. So these people are saying, what? Yeah, got to have full-time youth ministry, got to have 2 guards on the nursery. And the reason they say that is we have homeless members. So like, I got a little bit of that church you want. Like, Timothy sits on the front row. He's homeless. He's an African American, probably a little bit on the autistic scale. This is the kind of person that's going to be in heaven with you. She's also the kind of person that scares every mom out of your church. Stands too close to you. He doesn't bathe all the time. Doesn't understand social signals. We've had several Sundays, like homeless people walk in and sit down the front row. Guy with his guitar, he starts talking to Chris when he's preaching. What you see in that moment is that these people, they poop a brick. They got 3 kids in the nursery and a Suburban in the parking lot, and the dad's wondering if he scrapped the Suburban and the mom's wondering if he's taking the kids. So if you don't acknowledge that you're going to put your church in the wrong place, once you put it there, now you're doing really different nursery work. Or you can't keep these people. Maybe we shouldn't. I'm not, but I'm telling you what is happening, not what could happen. You've got to decide what is happening in your church, or you can't serve it well. And some of you won't like that. That doesn't mean you shouldn't serve it. And you say, I want to change it. You're not. Your church is what it is.
Hey,
And
John,
yeah.
I really try to get the pastors to move most of the church to First Pres Cumberland in West,
Oh yeah.
and leave a remnant that could be the urban church there. And they were like, they just couldn't do it.
Because we've got to figure out a way, probably to divide and create 3 churches. We need a remnant, we need hipsters, and we need Cedar Springs Junior. We do. Like, I want to go to Cedar Springs. Like, you go to Cedar Springs, you drop your kids off, they learn about Old Testament stories. They say they want to come back. No one was threatened. It went an hour and 15 minutes. They had weekly communion anyway. I met friends. They were cool people. There were 17 restaurants between there and the house. I went downtown. The students are blowing up the restaurants. They threw beer. There's a bunch of beer cans in football games after in our parking lot. It smells like like an Ole Miss football game when they're losing. And it's hard to park. People have to park 5 blocks away. You have to walk by a bunch of people doing the walk of shame on the way to church. These people who did the walk of shame in their 40s and 30s don't want to admit it's still happening, and they sure don't want their new homeschool children to see it. Heaven forbid they should see people living that they want to reach one day with the gospel. So this thing is complicated, and quite honestly, and Chris and I talked about this a lot, so it's important to me now. We just all had a hard time admitting this is what it is. Because we're the worst kind of church. We're a drive-to church. And nobody wants a drive-to church. Because we kind of need a staff working out here. And they can live, and then we need some people living in some very specific homes up here. And then we've got our liberal Democrat, Eddie. I mean, he's growing food in the median. I'm not kidding. He's growing food in the median. He's capturing water on things. He's got homeless. He knows 20 homeless people. He's got a newspaper that makes our church melt down on its stances on stuff like, and that's what we are, and we can't say it.
Our executive minister, I know this is not original to him, but he always tells us in staff meeting, he says, your system is perfectly designed to give you the results that you've got. Like, and I think that's really what you're trying to say here is that you have to admit what you are, look what you are and say, this is what we've built, this is what we've made. Like, this is what...
That's right, and the bigger the church, the more frustrating this is for staff, because the bigger you get, there is a system, and they're just asking you to run it. And it's not, there's real ministry there. That's real life, talking to people about Christ, discipling. But we're all like, let's change. Let's make Trinity Montgomery be the Latino capital of the world. It's not happening. And the problem with our church is, it probably could be, because there are one of the few multi-ethnic churches in town, and some tiny bizarre, but none of these people are. So, like, if you don't see what it is, you're going to shoot yourself. Robert.
So the what is, Chad can probably speak to this better than I can. Season like how old's that?
208, baby.
208.
Whoa.
So how do you go from advice advice on how do you go from what is when a lot of your people don't want to admit the what is, and you're the outsider, you're the employee, you're not the owner. I know it's building through relationship.
Yeah, but I think there's the second piece of this is, I'm just going to be really bad on this, is you put 50 people in a seat somewhere, you can do whatever you want to in these big churches. So if you say, I know y'all want me to run, I forget your title, says young adult right now, young adult program, and I'm running it. But I've realized that I can go over here and start this other thing, and I can do it and keep your machine going, and people will be happy. And I create people, they'll let me do it. They'll let you do it in this. I mean, at the end of the day, First Pres Chattanooga, for instance, the first person that can put 100 college students in their church gets paid $1 million. They tried to put college students in that church since 1955, and they lost all of them to InterVarsity. So the first person that can crack that nut right, they win. But on the whole, there's real ministry here. It's just not Tim Keller revolution ministry.
Right.
So the trouble with Tim Keller is it looks like what he did was go to New York City and lead all these people to Christ. The truth is, in that church in the early days when there were about 1,000, you could identify 400 people who had either been in InterVarsity, Campus Crusade, or RUF. Not InterVarsity and Crusade were much bigger. Like, he built that church on Southern Christians. Like, it was not New Yorkers at first. Now it is. But like, it wasn't just like his church has ultimately become the thing. It looks like everybody wants. Like, it's not an inner city church. His church is suburban. His church is people who get stable jobs, who figure out a way to do 2 kids in the city, who want programs for their kids. You have no idea the Redeemer program stuff. It makes First Pres look like chump change joke. Like, they have hundreds of people out there running programs. To go to Redeemer right now is to get into the clog. It's not cool. It's not urban. It's not hipster. It's you run these 4 community groups. By the way, there's 1,000 people in those 4 community groups. Go get them. And I'm just saying, these big churches and these old churches, you just got to own. You're going to learn a lot of stuff, but it is not revolution. And revolution stops in a church plant the day you put a session in place. It just is. But I'm trying to help you say, you can't go to these places and God will work to change them. I'm not.
Right.
But you've got to own that they're beautiful things. Like, it's a beautiful thing. And it's been there a long time. And a lot of people became Christians. But 9-hour staff meetings where that person talks the whole time and your right face like falls off. You have cuss words in your head and you have to go do a quiet time to survive. That's part of the deal. Somebody had their hand up. Yeah.
So are you saying then, if that is what your church is, and you have movement in the church that you want to be something different, then does that mean plant another church, basically?
No, I don't like that idea. I'm saying that for you, let's use you. He's in Tupelo at, I forget the name. Lawndale. It means you create good relationships with elders and deacons. You do what they want. And I don't mean that like you're just the guy, but just like, here's the job we need you to do. And then in 5 years you can say, we really should try this. Like, you have to buy your chips.
Right.
Our problem is we go into church and we're like, I've been here 6 months, let me cash my chips in. This goes back to my first point. You don't have chips.
Yeah.
You're an employee. And they're not, you can earn some chips, but you don't have any chips. And there's nothing to cash in with them. They're like, we're not even sure you've done a year at the youth ministry cycle. Like, do a fall football thing before you do it. Before we, you can't, this is hard. Because we all want to lead, but often in the bigger settings where there's a lot of jobs available, it's less leadership and more work.
Yeah.
It's real ministry. Robert's doing real live ministry the way I am. But this is happening to me in my job. We're just a big machine. And there's a bunch of stuff that I'm like, 1, 2, and then I quit.
One of the things, talking about change and how you do it and everything, my pastor and I have been together 12 years at Grace. Our church was started by a bunch of folks from Coral Ridge who'd moved up to Ocala, and so we had that mentality. We had that to work with.
Big steeple.
Oh yeah, big steeple and high everything else, and so. But it's taken 12 years for us to move along, and it's taken a lot of deaths as well in the church to.
That's true. That's the truth.
But to begin to really have an outreach to young families. I mean, it's taken a long time and I can remember as the pastor and I started doing this, there were folks who came up to me and just like, why are you even going after these folks? They'll never come to the church. And to deal with that attitude, and for me to go through those stages of, I'm so angry at 50% of my congregation who's 50 and above, and I just can't stand, to beginning to say, I've got to love these people, and to now really and truly love these older folks. And they've gone from being suspect of me to now being my biggest fans. And these are not the young fans. These are, most of these.
Brokers.
Yeah, and they're 70 and above.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it takes time and it takes a lot of effort. I spend no time with these young families and my kids in those 30 minutes between Sunday school and church. I spend all of my time with those older folks. But it took 6 years of me doing that for them to start to catch on. Oh, you know what? I probably need to greet that young family who came into church today.
I'm writing it down. The last thing I would say is, here's the thing about this. So we planted this church in Knox Redeemer. There's been that between 9 church planted, a fellowship church plant, and something else. The churches that own that town have been there more than 50 years. Central Baptist, Bearden, Cedar Springs. Fellowship hadn't been there 50 years, but I think now it's been there 25, 30 years.
Would be the outlier.
Huh?
Faith Promise.
But Faith Promise is way out there. And then what's the Concord Baptist? And if you have a vision for those churches, then you just need to have a 50-year vision.
Right.
John Sawtell, when he went to Independence, said, hopefully I can pass on a church that's slightly different than the one I got, and the guy after me will do slightly different. And that's kind of what they've done between Sawtell and then Richie. It's just slowly become a really great church. Thanks for your time. Go in peace.
Okay.